I have a Stanley Bedrock 603 in my collection, and it is my absolute favorite plane, my go-to plane for smoothing for any kind of small planing operation. It's a nice heavy plane. It's in great shape. It has a hawk blade on it, which helps. I keep it sharp, and it has become my go-to plane in almost every circumstance. Just to start out here, I want to show the difference between the hawk blade and the standard blade. The hawk blade's heavier, the steel is thicker. It's a higher quality steel. You can see the thickness here is just a little bit thicker than the Stanley blade. If you weigh these blades, the Stanley weighs in at 3.6 ounces, and the hawk blade weighs in at 4.2 ounces. So it's a more substantial blade, I think, reducing vibration and just stays sharper longer, etc. As for the planes, the 603 weighs in at 3 pounds 5.6 ounces. And just to show you, an older 604 that I have weighs in at 3 pounds 2.2 ounces. So even though the 603 is smaller, it's actually heavier because they made them a little chunkier in later years. That 604 is a Type 3. You can see that it's got the B casting on the bed and the single patent date, and it was made probably around 1900. The 603 is probably a Type 9. It has Made in USA stamped in it. It has the Stanley logo in the lever cap, and it has the high knob and the later flat-sided body. Just to show you how these come apart and the difference between these two frogs and how they operate, the later plane, the 603, is in the foreground, and the earlier 604 plane is in the background. And you'll see these frogs attach. The 604 attaches like almost any Stanley frog with just 2 screws. Even this older Stanley Bedrock, even though it attaches with the screws, it has the larger bearing area between the frog and the body, like all Bedrock planes do. The newer 603 uses the pins to hold the frog down, and the only difference between these two, there's a little bit more of a bearing surface. I'll show you a close-up in a minute, but the big difference is that you can adjust the size of the mouth. You can move the frog forward and backward without removing the blade and the chip breaker. You can see a large bearing area. Both of them have a machined flat bearing area on the frog and on the body. Both of them have the grooves going down the edges of the frog to cause the frog to move perfectly 90 degrees with the body. And I do believe these make Bedrocks a little bit better planes than standard Stanley planes. You can see the pins that hold this down. There's a hole in the pin, and then these adjusting screws, or these tightening screws, as you draw them in, there's a cone-shaped end on the screw that goes into a cone-shaped hole in the pin, and as you drive that screw in, it cinches the pin down, holding the frog tightly. You can see also the adjusting wheel got bigger on the later plane, and it makes it a little bit easier to operate because you have a little more leverage as you're making those adjustments, even though that big wheel gets in the way of these 3 screws. I'll show you a close-up of that in a minute. But you can see these pins just go down in the hole. You have the hole that's in the side of the pin aiming toward the back so that those 2 screws behind the frog go into those holes and cinch the frog down to the plain body. Hope that all makes sense. Again, in a second here, I'll show you a close-up of those screws in both the newer and the older Bedrock, and you maybe get a little bit better idea. Again, the point of this new method of holding the frog down was that you could adjust the mouth size without having to remove the blade. Not sure that's all that important, because generally I get the mouth to where I like it and it never moves again until I've ground so much blade away that I've taken the blade apart and fussed with it. But generally I don't do much adjusting. But here you can see that you can adjust it with the blade in it by loosening the left and right screws and turning the adjusting screw in the middle to move the frog forward and backward. The screws, I'll just give you a little bit of a close-up here in a second. Here you can see again the older Bedrock mounts like the old ones did. Here's the newer Bedrock. You can see the two loosening screws left and right and the adjuster screw in the middle. And here's the older Bedrock with just the adjuster in the middle, no screws left and right, because the frog again mounts conventionally like all Stanley planes. Here are the planes again fully assembled, and now I'm going to just do a little bit of planing with my favorite 603 and make a few final comments, but it's a great little plane. They're really about the same length. It's just a little bit narrower than the 604 or than a Stanley number 4. And again, it makes it just a handy plane to use in almost every planing situation that requires either a smoother or similar. You can see it here on a piece of solid cherry. It's taking full width shavings, super easy, even through some stubborn grain. You can see they're paper thin. They're the full width of the board. I do plane with a little bit of skew in the plane. It allows you to get more of a slicing action from the blade instead of pushing it head on into the wood. And you can see I'm getting huge paper thin ribbons of wood off of that piece of solid cherry from my favorite smoothing plane, the Stanley Bedrock 603. Here I've just changed that view a little bit. Again, you can see these huge ribbons of wood coming off of that piece of cherry. Very satisfying use of this plane on solid cherry, removing a paper thin shaving with each stroke. The Hawk blade, I do believe, holds its edge a little bit longer than the standard plane. I haven't done anything scientific with regard to that, but it seems like once this plane is sharp, I go quite a while before I sharpen it again. Here I'm going to use it just as a smoother, just with a real quick shot of this piece of 1x6. It had a super rough surface on it, this 1x6, and so I'm just going to do a quick smoothing action with this 603, and you'll see in just a moment I just get a glass smooth flat surface out of this little piece of 1x6 using my favorite Stanley 603 plane. You'll see as it takes this down further and further, the resaw marks in this board are going away. It's getting flatter and flatter. It goes right over those knots without any hesitation, very smoothly and simply, and it didn't take long for me to get this board glassy smooth with this little 603 plane. Again, my favorite in my whole collection, and I have a ton of planes. I have a 2 through an 8 and a few in between, and quite a bit of older planes as well, but this one is the one I tend to just go to the shelf and grab almost every time I need to do something quick with a hand plane. It's my Stanley 603, probably a Type 9-ish, maybe 1930 or beyond-ish, and a great little plane. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please subscribe And thank you very much for watching.